Dr. Davis, can you share what some of your congregation's biggest challenges have been during COVID-19?
Really coming back to Rabbi Weisman's statement, many of them just trying to struggle through the process in terms of signing up, some who don't fit into the category yet, and they're trying to wait their turn. Then persons just trying to get an appointment. It's been challenging. It's been very challenging in our community. Although we have centers kind of all around us, but still in terms of really mass movement of persons getting the vaccine is still extremely challenged. As soon as we find out information, we try to share it quickly in terms of we find out something's going on at Giant, something's going on at CVS, something's going on at Six Flags, something's going on at the Sports and Learning Center. And so we try to make sure that we get that information out to as many people as possible. But there is some frustration in terms of persons. And then, of course, there is the other layer of persons who are kind of the wait and see. They want the first wave to go through and to see how that's going to work out. But I've also seen some of the people who wanted to wait for the first wave to go through have watched the frustration. So some of them are saying, well, maybe I shouldn't wait, because if I get a chance to get it, maybe I just ought to go in and get it. So it's still a mixed bag, if you will, in terms of where things are.
Thank you for that. And Rabbi Weisman, I know that you touched on this a little bit in terms of traditions within your congregation, but what has been your experience with bereavement and loss during this pandemic?
It's like so many things we've had to deal with, in the faith community and how we deliver services. A lot of it has just been a reimagining process and a adjusting of our expectations. In normal times, it's one of the community's functions to show up and support the mourners in burial and in those early days of mourning. And I'm blessed to work with a community that has had a long tradition of being almost oppressively good at following that commandment, to the point where there are times when we can be overwhelming in the number of people who show up and support, which is the exception, not the rule, I think. So for us, those empty spaces around us in the early days, and as fate would have it, we had a couple of funerals last March in the very early days of getting used to what the new reality was going to be. And that recognition that the space allowed room for us to be comforted directly by God became very comfortable for me looking at the space, and was very well received by those who needed the comfort. So I was grateful for the message and the insight to share it. We've learned how to work around the weaknesses of the technology. We've learned to go back and ask the questions that we've taken for granted for years. What is the purpose of everything that we're trying to do? Becomes a question that we haven't asked in years, that we're now forced to ask, for everything we do. And then to ask the question, how do we best achieve that? And when we isolate the things that we know we can't recreate, then it becomes, how can we provide something else of value? Or how can we suggest that folks help themselves in fulfilling that need? And, outside of the ability to shake hands and receive or give a hug in a time of support, we've been pretty successful in being creative and finding alternatives that seem to work. Getting texts into the hands of the worshipers to do an actual service on Zoom can be somewhat of a drag. So we've changed the focus of that time together from the service itself to a less formal worship and more of a sharing of memories and messages of support, to allow people to have that sense that they've been able to touch, at least figuratively, a little bit. What I'm starting to find now as we approach the 1 year anniversary of going online and leaving our physical building behind is I'm starting to sense not just an online fatigue, but I think a generalized fatigue that is more in the form of, hey, we've been the good soldiers this whole time, and we've stayed home, and we've done the social distancing, and we've washed our hands, and we've worn the masks. When do we get our break? And that's a hard one for me to answer because A, I'm in that camp with them, and B, most of the apparent answers from the outer behaviors of society are less than satisfactory. You know, it's a true test of faith in that respect. And the idea here is that just as we worship an unseen God whose presence we feel not with our tangible senses, but with our spiritual senses. And we've learned by other people's hard example and our being good doobies that taking an equal faith in this vaccine for what it's capable of doing on the negative side has gotten us to this point. And we're starting to lean on that faith now a little bit too. And it's an interesting faith exercise when it's inverted that way. Not sure how it's going to end up yet, but it seems to be doing some good in helping the people who are starting to express some frustration and starting to ask more and more of the questions. Will we be reopening for worship soon? You know, we're looking at a building with terrible airflow. And it's going to be a question for our relatively small congregation. Do we replace the entire ventilation system for the sake of reopening? Or do we ride out the storm a little bit longer and look to do more outdoor worship and gathering? You know, and those are the questions we're asking ourselves now and looking for the answers as spring arrives. So we're going to go through probably, I guess I would call this COVID probably 4.0 for our community over the next couple of months in terms of how we adjust.
Thank you for that. And I can only imagine how difficult it has been, you know, just speaking from the medical setting, how difficult things have been with this sudden change and how we do things. And likewise to that, Dr. Davis, how has your congregation or faith tradition changed some of its traditional practices? I know that you said that you're online, but have there been many other changes with respect to other traditions that occur in your church?
Everything has changed. From classes to ministries to meetings to counseling sessions to administratively, we've had to make just adjustments top to bottom in terms of how everything is done, how musicians rehearse. You know, they do a lot of stuff before they ever come onto our grounds. We've still been recording services live, but as we said, we have minimal in terms of a congregation being present. So it's affected everything. It's affected, you know, Rabbi Weisman mentions about the whole sense of a person passing front end of the pandemic. We were still trying to have funeral services. We knew that, we found out that wasn't going to work because persons really wanted us to break the rules. You know, the state of Maryland was coming up with certain numbers, and then they would say, "Oh, you know, who's watching?" And so we had to make that adjustment to say, well, we weren't going to have any funerals on our grounds, and so we now have directed persons to funeral homes. We support those families once they go there, and so like I say, so there is really no area of life at our church that is today the same. We've been doing a feeding on every Saturday probably since April-ish. We have probably fed, but we've probably seen about between 800 and 1,200 cars on our campus. We give them food. We've had partnerships with the Capital Area Food Bank, the Central Kitchen, several other partners have come and helped us. We've had government agencies to assist. And quite honestly, that's our biggest gathering of people every week, is when we feed on Saturdays. On any given Saturday, we probably have between 60 to 75 volunteers. Not all of them members of our church. Some students getting community service hours. And if anybody hears of a student wants community service hours, come see us any Saturday. We're there from 9:30 to 11:30. Our volunteers typically arrive between 8 and 8:30. And we do the social distancing and all of that. But I can't really think of any area that we have not taken a critical look at, just how the dynamics of our worship. We've taken this time since our buildings have been not as full to do improvements, because we knew we didn't really have people around. We also have the balance of trying to run a school. And so we have a school pre-kindergarten through 8th grade. Pre-pandemic, we were probably looking at about 230 students. Once the pandemic hit, we're probably looking at about 120 students. Some of them are on our campus. Most of them are hybrid and online. We've had to have certain students on our campus. We could put our preschool on campus and children of essential workers. And so that's been but we've had to deal with some interruptions. Once a teacher gets COVID, we got to shut down the whole building, sanitize the whole building. And so we've dealt with, trying to have minimal, really no persons entering our education side of our campus unless you have a specific need. And so we can't think of any area that has not been changed once this pandemic has hit us.
Thank you for that. And, that is so true. One thing that you touched on is a lot of the community service that you're having to do with regard to feeding and supplying the needs of the community. So both Rabbi Weisman and Dr. Davis, have you found that your churches or organizations have had an increased need to supply needs for the community, whether it's toiletries or food? Have you found that to increase now that COVID has really impacted our area?
No question. For us, like I say, we gave out 1,500 turkeys for Thanksgiving. We had our church sits about a mile and a half from FedEx Field. That's where the line of cars started. The line of cars started at FedEx Field all the way to our campus. Persons were trying to get turkey and food for Thanksgiving. We did a Christmas giveaway of toys. We thought it was going to be a 2-hour episode. It turned into about 6 hours. It was into the night. We still had workers out, but we had a lot of volunteers who gave us toys that we were able to give out to families. And so the need has been great. And we've been trying, as where we sit, we're just trying to make a difference and try to positively affect the lives of persons.
Thank you.
And we've had a similar experience. We obviously don't deal nearly in the same depth or breadth of community programs as you do, Dr. Davis. But our support of local involvement, things like the Bowie food pantry, things that we do on a regular basis, have been challenging to keep up, but we made an effort to keep them up. Reaching out to our community on a regular basis, to make up for not seeing each other, putting the onus on our lay leaders to make regular phone calls and check in, to make sure that we don't have individuals, living on their own in need, and finding out what the needs are. And as is frequently the case in the Jewish community and in others, I assume as well, getting past the pride of having to ask and being comfortable in accepting the help of others in difficult times. So all of that has become something that we become much more attuned to and aware of. One of the things that we've gone up and down on, and again, I think it's been a good barometer of where the fatigue factors have come in and and gone higher and lower has been in our willingness to educate ourselves and to take advantage of there being so many more offerings and so many more discussions like this happening online and available more flexibly, to study ourselves and offer new opportunities for our folks to learn and to come together in discussion of real-time issues, to strengthen and grow the community and to make us more effective. Dr. Davis and I are actually partnering together as in a class where we are both taking the class as students, to improve our understanding of each other's communities and relationships between the Black community and the Jewish community, with an eye towards what we're going to be able to do to become better allies in social justice when this is all over, in working together in a historic partnership that we've allowed over the years to fray, and we're working desperately now to fix for everybody's benefit. So, there have been new opportunities that come from it as well, but surely the responsibilities come first. And even in a smaller community that's more insular like ours is, they've been significant.
So are there uniqueness or variations to your faith that you believe would be helpful for others to understand, with regards to variations or uniqueness within your church, within your denomination, within your community, even within your family, that you think that it's important for other people to understand, especially with regards to COVID? Any suspicions or particular fears or resistance to some of the recommendations?
I think not from the leadership, but you, like I say, you deal with so many influences now that come from outside of the church, because the other thing that we're also working through, which is sort of the unspoken and almost the other elephant in the room, are dealing with the racial issues that are affecting the world. And so when persons start putting that into the mix, and it becomes, I know, especially from the African American community, they're just persons, the distrust factors that come up. And so I see us trying to work through that in terms of what history has been, in terms of some of the experiments which have been done even in America and inclusive of African Americans. And so I think that it's been helpful to not ignore that, and to just, yes, this has happened. This has been something that has happened, but in terms of how we're going to address the coronavirus, we everything is above board. As Dr. Bush talked about earlier, about how they said, it was rushed and all that. And then again, you've got such the influence now of, I almost hate to use the word, but fake news but you have so much of this misinformation that persons are getting, who take it as fact. And so so all of those dynamics I see as us trying to just articulate against that kind of thing, is sort of where we are. But I think that we try to say it from a point of our concern for others, our concern for their well-being, and so just trying to point them in proper directions. I'm sure Rabbi Weisman is such a genius of such a wordsmith. So I'll pass right over to him, and then he can fill in wherever I might have missed.
No pressure here. With that setup, the thing that struck me most as you were talking was thinking about the evolution of our liturgy on Friday nights. And one of the things that I deliberately tried to do at the beginning was not to recreate our worship service in the sanctuary. To acknowledge the elephant on the Zoom, as it were, that this was not the same setting, and therefore we might want to think about changing our expectations. And I allowed that to take us in the direction of more informal worship. And without intending to, I put a little bit more of an onus on myself to make that text of that worship a little bit different every week, and to make it a little bit more fitting to the moment of worship itself. And that's actually become a great source of creative energy and outcome. And one of the things that evolved over the course of time was we took our moment in the service where we have for years instinctively asked God to send the blessing of healing to all those who need it. And when we gather together, we have a list of those within our community and the relatives of our community for whom we are actually making this request. And we've over the years added the line afterwards that we recognize that there are those whose names we do not yet know who are equally in need and equally worthy of this blessing, and make sure that we're asking it in the name of everybody we've named and those who remain unnamed. As our time online has gone on, as events like, you know, the George Floyd incident, which was so traumatic on so many levels to our society, more so in a time when we weren't sure how physically to respond, much less emotionally and mentally. We found ourselves changing the message of that moment. And now when we ask for healing of body and soul, of spirit and mind, it's for those who are conventionally ill and recovering from injury, those who are suffering from the virus, those who are suffering the pains and hurts of hatred and violence. And it's expanded our sense of what we can hope to achieve by our prayers, and hopefully what we can hope to achieve when we go out from prayer, whether it's still in this, you know, world of living safely in our own walls, but even more so when we get to start to mingle together more. How do we become those partners and those allies? How do we understand our potential partners better for their different experience from us? How do we better see ourselves through their eyes to be able to communicate with them better, to bring about better results from working together? And, you know, we started back in December with a weekly discussion online for the community that was designed to teach the community about Judaism and to allow the members of my community who were sharing their own experiences each week to get a better sense of how we are seen. And what we found is that the value of such efforts is profound in itself, even though our goal in doing this was to strengthen a foundation for future work. The sharing and the awareness and the ability to see through other eyes. You know, when I stand in front of a sanctuary, and I know this is true for you as well, Dr. Davis, we're looking out at a sea of faces and worshipers. In this environment, the way we've been putting out worship, you know, the fact that we're not doing a hybrid, we're not recording a live service and broadcasting it, we're doing a live service from my dining room table, you know, and the way we're doing it as a broadcast, there are times when I feel more like Walter Cronkite reading the news, because I don't get to see those faces and get those meta responses back from my worshipers. But I've learned to make up for it in reading the chat afterwards, where people are instinctively responding in the moment, to listen to people as I talk to them during the week. And it amazes me constantly how many people start the conversation with, I'm really enjoying being able to tune in on Friday night for services. You know, that aspect of it is changed forever for us. I know that. And I hope that the lessons we're learning in responding to COVID, with all of its challenges, you know, are lessons that we're finding ways to extend over into these other areas that need our societal attention, that need our partnership and our intentional awareness on, to create change that is so long overdue and necessary for so many people. And if we can use this time to just retrench a little bit and to strengthen those foundations, then I'm praying that that's going to be time and energy well spent in the long run.
Thank you
Great,
for that.
thanks. Yeah, and for me, it's when I think about faith and I think about all that's happened in the context of COVID-19, all that's transpired this last year, the term that comes to mind is walk by faith, not by sight. And really that's so hard to do with all that's transpired, with all the isolation that's occurred, because, faith, spirituality is such an innate human thing. And really what we've had to do is depersonalize things, which makes it all the more challenging. And so I think whether you're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, really that's been the biggest challenge, is the disconnect, and trying to bridge that gap. And it does exacerbate the distrust of medicine, and people unfortunately have died sooner than they should, whether it's because they're delaying medical care that would have benefited them 6 months prior because they put it off because they were worried about getting COVID. And the concerns regarding, race and minorities and people of color being overly affected by COVID, I hope that finally drives home a permanent change, because there are people in medicine who say, oh, well, let's just go back to how it was before. And I sit there and I just scratch my head, and, I don't understand how you could even think that, when clearly the inequalities of access for people of color in those communities is there. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed permanently. Even the whole rollout of the vaccines, there's this dichotomy in medicine where medicine is thought of as a hospital, and it should be the hospital and the community. It shouldn't be either or. In a country that's this resource rich, there is room enough for both, and to address both permanently. I'm a history buff, and there was this documentary on Ulysses Grant, and it just blows my mind that some of the issues that we were dealing with as a country 160 years ago, we're still grappling with today. I don't understand that. And my hope is that through this, that we will have truly learned, and that it will be permanent, and that those things will be addressed, because we need to, as a society, for everybody's benefit. It's just that clear to me. So that's what I hope that we've learned through this crisis.
Thank you for that, Dr. Bush. And we have one final question for all of the panelists, and that is, do you have any final thoughts on the COVID vaccine?
Well, I can say that I got the Pfizer vaccine, and it went relatively well. I got it last Saturday, and so I'm scheduled to get my follow-up the end of this month, and I feel good about it. I don't think it's going to change anything that I do in terms of mask wearing, social distancing, and hand washing, and all the safety precautions. But I did want to do it. One of the things that I mentioned, and Dr. Bush can probably elaborate, I shared with our congregation the other day. I said, we have spent the last year trying to avoid coronavirus. But if you really think about it, not only have we avoided coronavirus, but some of us have avoided the common cold. And so to me, as we go forward, I think that these safety precautions are good. I don't know that handshakes will return. I don't know that they ever will. I think that persons are gonna be much more conscious of going forward as a result of what has happened. And for many of us, mask wearing will become a part of what we will do, period. I mean, I can't imagine getting on an airplane and not wearing a mask. With all that air compressed in that small area, and I plan on getting on a plane again. And so, but I know I would not even think about getting on a plane without wearing a mask. And so I see that there are going to be certain dynamics that are going to rest with us even after the pandemic. I think it's been good for us. We have been pushed forward, and in some cases shoved forward, because we did not necessarily want to go into these places and to give thought to it. But I think that it's needed. Rabbi Weisman mentions about his liturgy. We had to look at our own worship. What's necessary, what's not necessary. Time restraints. People will listen differently online than they will if they are sitting in a seat. And so we've got to just reprogram everything that we're doing.
So to Dr. Davis's point, he's absolutely correct. Every crisis really is an opportunity. He's absolutely right. They've looked at the numbers. Upper respiratory illness for the last year is down markedly, including the flu, because people are masking and social distancing. Regarding the vaccine, I understand the hesitancy. I understand the history of this country and why some people are reluctant to get it. What I can tell you is at this point in time, it is the best thing to help us overcome this, to try to get back to some normalcy. What we need medically in order to get back to normalcy and return to all those things that are so human and important to all of us is for herd immunity to get there, as well as decrease in the number of cases. We will get there, but it probably won't be until likely later on this year. And we've put in so much work and come so far, and we are turning the tide. If you look at the numbers are coming down. Now is not the time to give up, as hard as that is and as fatigued as people are, as Rabbi Steve noted. And then on a final note, given their acumen for medicine and how many times they've spoken with us, I'm going to make Rabbi Steve and Dr. Davis honorary MDs. That's for sure.
Another honorary doctorate.
You got it.
Oh, for me, the irony in what you said, Dr. Davis, about handshakes is thinking back on the history of how and why they started in the first place as a greeting. The idea being that the majority of the world was right-handed, and therefore that was the hand you would hold your weapon in if you were armed. And so by extending your right hand to shake someone you're meeting, you're expressing a statement of peace and I am coming unarmed. And the reciprocation of that was a powerful statement. Obviously, we have emerged and evolved far from that period, if for no other reason than our weapons are far larger and smaller and diverse, that doesn't work anymore, as sadly we've learned to avoid violence. But the handshake has outlived its historical usefulness. You're right, Henry. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's going to be the elbow bump of the Bash Brothers from the Oakland A's days, or what it's going to be that takes its place. But I trust our creative energies as individuals in a community. I trust our spirituality. I trust our ability to fulfill our needs, without taking advantage of others, that we'll find the way to do it appropriately as a response to this experience. And that too will be part of the growth.
Thank you. So in closing, this was really informative and very helpful. So wanted to thank all of our panelists today, the honorary Dr. Rabbi Weisman, Dr. Bush, Dr. Davis. So thank you all very much for recording with us today. And we believe that these type of candid conversations about race, religion, and healthcare can really help us understand and learn from one another and move us from this point of where we are to where we need to be. So thank you all for joining us today.